Before the sky broke open, before the light fell like a wound stitched into the heavens, there was only screaming, not the kind that echoes and fades, but the kind that sinks into stone and flesh and memory. A world that had forgotten what mercy sounded like. A world where hope was not crushed, it was never allowed to be born. Steel rang against steel, prayers died in throats, and monsters wore the faces of men. This was a land that devoured heroes and spat out legends as corpses. And then, something answered the darkness. A tear of impossible brightness split the clouds, as if the sun itself had been stabbed. For one heartbeat, every demon, every apostle, every suffering soul felt it the sensation of being seen, not judged, seen. And far above the ruined battlefield, a red and blue figure fell from the sky like a promise this world had never earned. What if Superman entered Berserk? What if light stepped willingly into endless darkness? The first thing Clark Kent felt was pain that wasn't his own. It hit him before the ground did, an ocean of anguish so dense it nearly staggered him in mid-air. He slowed his descent instinctively, boots hovering inches above cracked earth, soaked black with old blood. The air itself tasted wrong. Not poison, not radiation, but despair. A psychic weight, pressing against his chest harder than gravity ever could. He straightened, cape fluttering in a wind that carried the smell of ash and iron. His senses reached outward, expecting cities, heartbeats, the quiet chaos of life. Instead, he found ruins, villages reduced to ribs of burned timber, fields where nothing grew, roads lined with corpses that had been there long enough to be claimed by crows and memory. Clark swallowed. He had seen dead worlds before. Krypton's final moments were carved into his soul. The apocalypse had taught him what cruelty looked like when it wore a crown. But this felt different. This wasn't destruction from a single cataclysm or tyrant. This was a world slowly, lovingly tortured over centuries. Somewhere nearby, steel screamed. Clark's head snapped toward the sound. His hearing locked onto it, instantly the rhythmic clash of a blade far too large to be wielded by any normal man. Each swing carried rage, exhaustion, defiance, and beneath it all, a heartbeat that refused to stop, no matter how much the world demanded it should. He was gone in a blur. The battlefield was small, but the violence within it was absolute. A lone man stood at its center, surrounded by bodies that were not entirely human. Twisted limbs, warped faces frozen in expressions of hunger and delight, even in death. Their blood steamed faintly on the ground, as if reality itself rejected their presence. The man was enormous, his body wrapped in scars and sweat and blood. He wielded a slab of iron that barely resembled a sword, dragging it behind him as he staggered forward. One eye burned with fury. The other Clark felt it before he understood it had seen hell and been marked by it. Guts. Clark didn't know his name yet, but he knew his pain. Another shape dropped from the tree-line, a creature that had once been human. Its mouth split too wide, teeth like broken gravestones. It lunged. Guts roared and swung, but his body was slowing. Muscles screamed. Bones threatened to give. The sword met flesh, but not deep enough. Before the monster could strike back, a red blur passed between them. The creature exploded. Not from heat vision. Not from a punch meant to kill. Clark simply put himself in the way, one hand closing around the monster's skull with controlled, impossible strength. The pressure was enough. The thing collapsed into lifeless meat, hitting the ground with a wet finality. Silence followed, heavy, disbelieving. Guts stared. He didn't lower his sword. He didn't relax. His breath came in ragged pulls as his one good eye tracked the stranger, hovering inches above the ground. A man dressed like no knight he had ever seen, wearing colors too bright for this cursed land. A man who had just erased an apostle as if it were nothing. Cliffs laughed once, a short, broken sound. "Crate," he muttered. Another hallucination. Clark raised his hands slowly, palms open. He had learned this gesture in 100 worlds. It meant peace, even when peace felt like a lie. "I'm real," Clark said gently, "and I'm here to help." The words felt small the moment they left his mouth. Guts' laughter turned sharp, bitter. He planted the sword into the ground and leaned on it like a gravestone. "Hell," he rasped. "You don't belong here. Nobody who can help does." Clark took a step closer, boots crunching on bone fragments. "I don't know this world yet, but I know suffering, and I know it shouldn't be like this." That was when Clark felt the brand. It burned like a beacon on Guts' neck, invisible to the eye but screaming to Clark's senses. a metaphysical wound carved into the man's soul. It wasn't just a mark, it was a summons, a promise of endless pursuit. Evil drawn to him like wolves to blood. Clark's jaw tightened. Before he could speak again, the air shifted. Reality bent. The sky darkened as if something vast had blinked. Clark felt eyes on him, not physical ones, but ancient awarenesses pressing against his mind. He looked up, instinctively squaring his shoulders, and for the first time since arriving, he felt something close to fear. Not for himself, for this world. High above, beyond clouds that no longer obeyed natural law, something watched the man of steel with interest, and in the distance, as night began to fall too quickly, the dead started to move. Clark turned back to Guts. "You're not alone anymore," he said, voice firmer now. "I won't let this world break you." Guts met his gaze, eye burning with defiance and exhaustion and a lifetime of betrayal. "We'll see," he said quietly. "This world breaks everyone." As the darkness closed in, Clark Kent stood between a cursed man and an unforgiving fate, unaware that by stepping into Berserk's world, he had just challenged gods who had never known opposition, and they were already deciding how to make him suffer. The night came down like a verdict. Clark felt it immediately. The way darkness here wasn't just the absence of light, but a living pressure that pressed against the mind. On Earth, night brought quiet, stars, rest. In this world, it brought hunger. He heard them before he saw them. Not footsteps, but scrapes, wet sounds, whispers that crawled just beneath hearing, speaking languages older than sanity. From the trees, from the ruins, from places that should have been empty, shapes began to gather. Guts pulled the Dragonslayer free from the ground with a grunt, his body screaming in protest. "This is when they come," he said flatly. "Every night. Because of the brand." Clark positioned himself instinctively in front of him. "How many?" Guts gave a humorless smile. "Enough." The first creature lunged from the shadows, its form half smoke, half flesh. Clark moved faster than thought, striking with precision, not power. He didn't want to know how fragile reality was here yet. The thing disintegrated under the blow, its scream cutting off like a snapped wire. Then more came. Clark became motion. They wove through the battlefield, intercepting claws meant for Guts, tearing monsters apart with hands that could shatter planets, but he restrained himself, always restraining himself. Each strike was calculated, controlled, but even so, the creatures stood no chance. They were fast, savage, but they were nothing compared to him, and yet they kept coming. Guts fought behind him like a man possessed. His sword cleaved through bodies that refused to stay dead, each swing driven by pure survival. Clark could feel his exhaustion worsening by the second. Broken ribs, old wounds reopening. A body that had long passed its limits and kept going out of sheer spite. A creature slipped past Clark's guard, emerging directly behind Guts. Its claws were inches from the man's spine. Clark saw red. He crossed the distance instantly, grabbing the thing and hurling it skyward. A thin line of heat vision followed, precise and restrained. The creature vanished in a burst of ash high above the tree line. For a moment, the monsters hesitated. They sensed it now. Not just strength but defiance. Something that didn't belong to their rules. The whispers grew louder, angrier. Clark planted his feet and let his presence expand. He wasn't threatening them. He wasn't roaring. He simply stood there, cape rippling, eyes glowing faintly with contained solar fire. "You will not touch him," Clark said. The words carried weight. Not magic but conviction so absolute it bent the air. One by one, the creatures recoiled. Some dissolved back into shadow. Others screamed in frustration before being dragged away by unseen forces. Within moments, the battlefield fell quiet again. Too quiet. Guts leaned heavily on his sword, breathing hard. "They'll be back," he said. "They always are." Clark turned to him. "Not like this. Not tonight." Guts studied him in silence. Up close, Clark saw everything, the scars layered upon scars, the way pain had become Guts' natural state, and beneath it all, an anger so focused it had kept him alive when mercy would have killed him. "You're not human," Guts finally said. Clark nodded. "No, that armor, that sword." Guts gestured vaguely at Clark's chest, his cape. "None of it makes sense." Clark hesitated, then spoke honestly. "I come from another world. I was sent here by accident or fate. I don't know yet." Guts laughed again, softer this time. "Figures only something not from this hell could survive it." Clark glanced at the brand again. its invisible scream gnawing at his senses. That mark, it's calling them. Guts' jaw tightened. It marks me as prey. To demons, to apostles, to the ones who really run this world. The ones who really run it, Clark repeated. Before Guts could answer, Clark felt it again, that pressure, that gaze. Reality rippled. High above, far beyond the clouds, 5 figures sat in impossible stillness. They were not flesh, not entirely. They were concepts given form: causality, desire, despair, the God hand, and one of them smiled. "He does not belong," Slan murmured, her voice a caress of knives. "Yet he has entered the flow," said Void, ancient and cold. "Causality bends, but does not break." Or perhaps, Ubik giggled, it simply finds a new way to hurt. Their attention fixed on Clark like a blade. Down below, Clark stiffened. His instincts screamed. Whatever was watching him was not something he could punch. His Guts noticed the change. "You feel it now," he said quietly. "Them." Clark looked to the darkened sky. "They're not gods," he said. "They're parasites." Guts' eye widened slightly. Not at the insult, but at the certainty behind it. "You say that like it matters." "It does," Clark replied. "Because gods who feed on suffering don't deserve worship. They deserve to be stopped." For the first time in years, something unfamiliar stirred in Guts' chest. Not hope, but curiosity. As dawn finally crept across the ruined land, thin and pale like a wounded thing, Clark stood watch while Guts slept, sitting upright, sword still in hand. Clark listened to the world breathe, every scream, every distant death, every whispered prayer that no one answered, and he made a silent promise. If this world was built on despair, then despair would have to face him. Above them, the God Hand watched patiently, because breaking hope was their specialty, and Superman had just given them something new to destroy. Morning in this world did not bring warmth. The sun rose like an obligation rather than a gift, pale and distant, as if even it feared looking too closely at what lay below. Clark watched its light crawl across broken ground, revealing things the darkness had hidden out of mercy rather than secrecy. Bodies, burned homes, symbols carved into stone with desperate hands. Guts stirred, waking not with relief, but readiness. Pain was his alarm clock. He stood slowly, joints cracking, and reached for his sword without looking at Clark. "He's still here?" he said. Clark nodded. "I will be." They moved through the ruins together. Guts led, because he knew the land, and Clark followed, because he refused to leave him unguarded. Villagers watched from hiding places, eyes hollow, hands shaking around farm tools that had been used as weapons too many times. They flinched at Clark's appearance. Some fell to their knees, others spat in fear. "Is not a god," Guts growled at one trembling man. "If he were, he wouldn't be here." Clark felt the words land like a quiet accusation. He didn't argue. A child stepped forward, barefoot, bruised. She stared at Clark's cape, at the symbol on his chest, and for a moment, her eyes shone with something fragile and dangerous. "Is it over?" she asked. Clark knelt so they were eye to eye. "Not yet," he said gently, "but it can be better." Her mother dragged her back, terror overriding hope. Clark straightened slowly, the familiar ache settling into his chest. He had seen this before worlds, where hope had become a liability. As they left the village, Guts finally spoke. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Talk like that," Guts said. "You'll get them killed." Clark stopped walking. "They deserve the truth. They deserve to live," Guts snapped, turning on him. "Hope gets people noticed. It makes them hesitate when they should run. In this world, hope is bait." Clark held his gaze, unflinching. "Then this world is wrong." Guts laughed harshly. "You're starting to get it." He reached a crossroads by noon, 3 paths, marked by rotting signs and bones nailed into trees. Clark's senses prickled. Something was wrong. Not monsters. Not yet. This was organized. The ambush came with horns. Men surged from cover, armed and armored, bearing a banner stained brown with old blood. Mercenaries, human, desperate. Their leader raised a sword and pointed it at Clark. "That thing," he shouted, voice shaking, "the one with the brand, travels with you. Give him to us, and you can leave." Guts' hand tightened around the hilt of his sword. "Here we go." Clark stepped forward. "No one needs to die today." The mercenaries laughed. "Nervous. Hungry. You don't know what you're asking," the leader said. "That man brings demons. We lost half our company last night. That wasn't his fault, Clark replied. It doesn't matter, the man said. The world doesn't care about fault. They're charged. Eclipse moved faster than they could comprehend. Swords were plucked from hands. Armor was bent, not crushed. Men were disarmed, spun aside, pinned gently to the ground by pressure they couldn't resist. In seconds, the battlefield was silent except for labored breathing and stunned silence. No blood. Guts stared. The mercenary leader struggled, sword twisted into useless scrap. Monster, he whispered. Clark looked at him sadly. No, he said. Just someone who refuses to let this world decide who you have to be. They fled soon after, fear outweighing greed. Guts said nothing as they continued walking. Finally, he spoke. You could have killed them. Yes, you didn't. Clark met his eye. They weren't the enemy. Guts scoffed. Everyone's the enemy eventually. Clark stopped again. Is that what you believe? Guts didn't answer. They made camp near an old stone bridge at dusk. As Clark watched the horizon, something shifted. The air thickened. The brand screamed. From the river below, something rose. It was massive, serpentine, its body stitched together from countless corpses. Faces screamed from within its flesh, mouths opening and closing in silent agony. An apostle Guts was on his feet instantly, teeth bared. This one's mine. Clark stepped forward. No, you're exhausted. That's not your call. The apostle laughed, a sound like drowning. Ah, the struggler brings a new toy. It lunged. Clark met it head-on. The impact cracked the bridge, stone exploding outward. Clark grabbed the creature, feeling the weight of suffering packed into its form. He didn't hesitate. He flew straight up, dragging the apostle with him. High above the clouds, Clark tightened his grip. I don't know what broke you, he said softly, but you don't get to break anyone else. He ended it quickly, cleanly. The body fell, lifeless, into the river far below. Clark descended slowly, landing beside Guts. The man stared at the sky, then at Clark. You killed it, Guts said. You see, you didn't enjoy it. No. Guts was silent for a long time. Then, quietly, that's new. Far above, the God Hand observed. He interferes, Conrad hissed. He inspires, Slan purred. Voight spoke last. Then causality will respond. The brand burned hotter than ever, and somewhere in the dark, something ancient began to move. The night answered with thunder. Not from the sky, but from the earth itself, deep, distant, like something vast shifting its weight beneath reality. Clark felt it through his boots, through his bones, through senses that told him this world was reacting to him the way a wounded animal reacts to pain. Guts felt it too. He didn't look surprised, only tired. That means we're being noticed, he said, tightening the straps on his armor. By something worse. Clark studied the horizon. His vision pierced miles of forest and ruin, catching movement that didn't belong to any natural pattern. Columns of smoke rose where there should have been none. Villages burned not from raids, but from panic. Fear spreading faster than any army. People are running, Clark said. Something's driving them. Guts nodded. Apostles don't just kill. They hunt fear. When something new appears in this world, something stronger always comes to remind it who's in charge. Clark clenched his fists. He had faced conquerors, tyrants, gods who called themselves inevitable. None of them frightened him the way this truth did. This world wanted suffering. It fed on it. They reached the outskirts of a town by midnight, or what remained of one. Fires smoldered. Corpses hung from wooden frames, arranged like warnings. The brand burned so fiercely now that Clark could almost see it, a red echo in the air around Guts. Then they heard laughter. Apostles emerged from the smoke, 3 of them, each grotesque in a different way. One bloated and crawling, its body a nest of eyes. One tall and skeletal, wings of torn flesh dragging behind it. The third, almost beautiful, a woman's face stretched over something wrong, smiling with cruel familiarity. Struggler, she crooned. You've brought a friend. Clark stepped forward. Leave. Now. The apostles laughed harder. You feel it, don't you? The woman said, eyes locking onto Clark. The rules bend for you, but they will break you all the same. They attacked together. Clark moved to intercept, but the ground beneath him collapsed. Not physically, spatially. Gravity twisted. His body slammed sideways into a wall that shouldn't have been there, reality folding like paper around him. For the first time since arriving, Clark was slowed. Guts roared and charged. Dragonslayer carving through the nearest apostle, black blood spraying. The skeletal one took flight, shrieking, while the many-eyed beast wrapped itself around Clark, screaming with 1,000 mouths. Clark strained, muscles burning not from force, but from resistance. This wasn't strength opposing him, it was causality. Probability, fighting back. No, Clark growled. He pushed. Light flared from his eyes as he tore free, ripping the creature apart in a blinding burst of heat and motion. The recoil shattered buildings for blocks. Clark hovered, breathing hard not from exhaustion, but from anger. The skeletal apostle dove toward fleeing townsfolk. Clark was there before it reached them. The fight was brutal, fast. Clark adapted, striking through distortions, anticipating warped physics, refusing to be boxed in by a world that said he shouldn't win. One by one, the apostles fell screaming, cursing, denying. When it was over, the town was silent. Survivors stared at Clark like he was something out of legend. Some cried, some prayed. One man whispered, "An angel." Guts wiped blood from his face. "Don't call him that," he said. "Angels don't stay." Clark looked at him sharply. "I will," Clark said. "I'm not passing through. I'm not here to make a point and leave." Guts turned away. "You say that now?" The brand pulsed violently. Clark winced, clutching his head as a wave of alien sensation flooded his mind. A vision, a vast, endless sea of faces screaming in unison, a spiral of darkness. 5 thrones suspended above a pit that went on forever. The God Hand. Void's voice echoed in Clark's thoughts, calm and merciless. "You disrupt the flow." Slan's laughter followed. "We will teach you despair." Clark hovered there, unmoving, eyes burning with defiance. "You don't control fate," he said aloud. "You exploit it." "All who resist us learn the same lesson," Void replied. "Hope is the deepest cruelty." The vision shattered. Clark dropped to one knee, breath ragged. Guts was at his side instantly, gripping his shoulder. "You saw them," he said quietly. "Yes." Guts' voice hardened. "Then you understand now. This world doesn't end. It grinds you down until there's nothing left." Clark stood slowly. "Then I'll be the thing it can't grind." Above them, unseen, causality tightened its grip, and the God Hand began preparing a lesson written in blood. The lesson began at dawn. Clark felt it before he saw it, this sudden spike in suffering, like 1,000 knives turned inward at once. His senses reached out across miles, across forests and valleys, and what they found made his chest tighten. Villages burning simultaneously, not at random, deliberately, coordinated cruelty. Guts watched Clark stiffen. "What is it?" "They're provoking me," Clark said. "They want me to choose." "Choose what?" Clark didn't answer. He was already moving. He carried Guts with him, lifting him effortlessly despite the man's protests. The wind roared past as they crossed leagues and seconds, descending into a valley where smoke coiled like serpents into the sky. Apostles stood among the flames, herding people like cattle, not killing them. Yet Clark landed between them and the villagers with a shockwave that split the earth. "Enough!" One apostle, a hulking mass of iron-hard flesh, grinned. "There he is. The light that screams." Clark charged. The fight was unlike the others. The apostles didn't attack together, they spread out. One engaged Clark directly, its body warping around his blows, soaking up force through unnatural causality. Another slipped past him, heading for the villagers. Clark hesitated. In that heartbeat, the God Hand smiled. The apostle reached the crowd. Screams erupted. Clark heard bones break. He tore himself free, annihilating the one in front of him with raw power. He had been holding back, and arrived too late. Blood soaked the dirt. Clark knelt beside a dying man, hands glowing as he tried to stop wounds that were already beyond healing. The man's eyes were calm. "Don't blame yourself," he whispered. "At least, we were seen." The light faded from his eyes. Clark stayed there for a moment too long. Another village burned. Then another. They were forcing him to confront a truth he had avoided since arriving. He could not be everywhere. Not in a world engineered to punish intervention. By nightfall, Clark hovered above the valley, smoke drifting around him like accusation. His fists trembled not with fear, but with restraint. Guts approached slowly. "This is how they break you," he said. "Not by beating you. By making you fail." Clark's voice was low. On my world, I save people. That's what I do. Guts looked at the ruins. Here saving people paints targets on their backs. Clark turned to him sharply. Then what do? Guts met his gaze, unflinching. You survive. You keep moving. You'll kill what you can. And you don't promise more than the world will allow. Silence stretched between them, thick with ash. Clark looked back at the burning horizon. I won't accept that. Acceptance isn't required, Guts said. Only endurance. That night, Clark didn't sleep. He listened to every distant scream, every whispered prayer. For the first time since leaving Earth, he felt doubt creep in, not about his strength, but about his purpose. High above, the God Hand watched as the man of steel struggled with something they knew well, hope turning inward, and they prepared the next move. The next move came with a name. Clark heard it carried on the wind, whispered by refugees huddled in caves and ruins, spoken with equal parts terror and reverence. Griffith of a name echoed in Guts, like a blade twisting in an old wound. Clark felt it immediately, the shift in his companion's heartbeat, the way his posture tightened, rage flooding through exhaustion, like fire through dry grass. We don't go near him, Guts said flatly when Clark asked. Clark studied him. You know who he is? I know what he was, Guts replied, and what he became. They reached the city that still stood, improbably intact. White stone walls rose above surrounding devastation, untouched by war or rot. Soldiers patrolled the streets in shining armor, their banners pristine. People smiled here, laughed. Children ran freely. Clark felt sick. This place shouldn't exist, Guts muttered. Not like this. At the city's heart stood a tower of impossible elegance, and atop it, a man in white gazed out over the land like a benevolent king. Griffith turned as Clark approached, his smile warm, almost gentle. Welcome, he said. You must be the one they're calling the light. Clark felt at thence the wrongness. Not darkness, not malice in the way demons carried it. This was something colder, more refined, evil dressed as salvation. You built this, Clark said, in a world that doesn't allow it. Griffith's eyes flicked briefly to Guts. Something unreadable passed between them. I gave people what they wanted, Griffith replied softly. Safety, purpose, a dream, and the cost. Clark asked. Griffith stepped closer, his presence pressing against Clark's senses like velvet over steel. Dreams always require sacrifice. Cliff's hand shook on his sword. You did this to him, Clark said, nodding toward Guts. 2000s. Griffith's smile never faded, and I would do it again. For my kingdom. The air grew heavy. Clark realized with dawning clarity that this man wasn't merely an apostle. He was something else, something chosen. Leave this world, Clark said. Whatever you've made, it's built on suffering. It won't last. Griffith's eyes hardened. You think you're the first to challenge fate? You think strength alone makes you righteous? Behind him, reality bent. Wings of shadow unfurled. The city's citizens froze, eyes glazing as if their strings had been pulled. I am destiny, Griffith whispered. Clark took a step forward, cape snapping behind him. Then destiny just met resistance. The ground cracked between them. High above, the God Hand leaned forward, watching intently. This was no longer a test. It was a collision. And somewhere deep within Clark, something changed not into rage, but resolve sharpened by failure and loss. If this world would only listen to cruelty, then it would learn what compassion backed by unbreakable will looked like. The collision did not begin with a punch, it began with silence. Griffith raised one hand, and the world obeyed. The air thickened until even Clark felt resistance pressing against his skin. Not physical force athwart, causality itself, aligning behind a will that had paid the price to command it. You don't understand this world, Griffith said calmly, hovering now, wings of shadow stretching across the sky. It devours those who cling to ideals. I reshaped it so people could live. Clark's eyes swept the frozen city, the smiling faces locked in place. The soldiers who didn't blink. They're not living, he said. They're being spared pain by having their choices stolen. Griffith's expression tightened, just slightly. Choices overrated. Guts could barely breathe. The brand screamed like a living thing, pulling him toward Griffith with hateful inevitability. His vision blurred, rage and agony crashing together. You took everything, he growled, and you still call it a dream. Griffith didn't look at him. You were never meant to understand. Clark moved. He crossed the space between them faster than sound, fist drawn back, but the strike never landed. Space folded, redirecting his momentum sideways, slamming him through a tower in an explosion of stone and dust. The city gasped as one. Clark emerged from the rubble instantly, unhurt, but stunned by the impact, but by the realization. Griffith wasn't stronger than him. He was protected. Every action Clark took was being weighed, rerouted, optimized against him by a universe that wanted Griffith to win. You see, Griffith said gently, even you must obey the story. Clark hovered higher, eyes glowing brighter. Stories can be rewritten. He unleashed his heat vision not as a beam, but as a wide, controlled flare, bathing Griffith in solar fire. The light bent, curved, split-sliding harmlessly around Griffith, like water around stone. But the city screamed. The illusion shattered. Walls cracked. Citizens collapsed, clutching their heads as the truth slammed into them, memories of suffering flooding back all at once. Griffith faltered, his composure cracking for the first time. Clark didn't miss it. He surged forward again, this time grappling Griffith directly. The impact sent shockwaves rippling across the city, glass shattering for miles. For a heartbeat, Clark felt him felt. The man beneath the mirth, ambition, terror, a dream so fragile it had required the sacrifice of thousands to sustain. You didn't save them, Clark said through clenched teeth. You hid from pain and called it destiny. Griffith's eyes burned. Pain is the foundation of this world. Then, it's a broken foundation. The God Hand intervened. Reality screamed. Black fractures tore open the sky as Void's presence pressed down like an executioner's blade. Clark was ripped away from Griffith mid-stride, hurled across dimensions for a fraction of a second, long enough to feel infinity claw at his mind. You cannot win, Void intoned. Causality bends for us. Clark screamed, back not in defiance, but declaration. Then I'll bend with it. I won't break. He forced himself back, re-entering the city in a burst of light that drove shadows screaming into retreat. Griffith staggered, breathing hard now, his perfection fractured. Guts watched it all, heart pounding. For the first time since the eclipse, he saw Griffith struggle. His city was collapsing. Their dream was failing. Griffith retreated, wings folding around him like a closing curtain. This isn't over, he said coldly. You don't belong here, Subramani, and this world will teach you why. He vanished. The sky sealed. The pressure lifted. Clark dropped to one knee, chest heaving not from injury, but from the weight of what he had just challenged. Guts approached slowly. You fought him, he said, and lived. Clark looked at the ruined city, at people sobbing as reality reclaimed them, and they suffered because of it. Guts shook his head. They were suffering already. He just showed them the truth. Clark clenched his fists. Truth isn't enough. I have to do more than react. I need to change the rules. High above, unseen, the God Hand watched with new interest. Because the Man of Steel had done something no one ever had. He had made destiny hesitate. The hesitation did not last. The world corrected itself the way a body rejects a foreign object. Where Clark passed, reality hardened. Probability narrowed. The margins for mercy shrank. He could feel it now. Every step forward met with invisible resistance, like wading upstream through fate itself. They left the ruined city at dawn. No one tried to stop them. Survivors watched in silence as Clark and Guts walked away, not with gratitude, but with something heavier, awareness. Knowing the truth in this world was often worse than ignorance. Guts broke the silence first. You rattled them. Clark glanced at him. Not enough. Guts gave a dry laugh. Enough to make them angry. That's usually how people die faster here. Clark stopped walking. I can't keep playing defense. They manipulate events, push suffering where they know I can't reach in time. I need leverage. Guts turned. I sharp. There's no leverage against gods, and they shouldn't have allowed themselves to be touched, Clark replied. They reached an old battlefield by midday. Rusted weapons littered the ground like grave markers. Clark knelt, brushing dirt from a broken helmet. He could hear the echoes, hear last stands, betrayals, prayers unanswered. This world runs on despair, Clark said quietly. But despair isn't infinite. It's cultivated, harvested. Guts watched him carefully. You sound like you're planning something dangerous. Clark stood. I am. That night, the brand flared brighter than ever before. The attack came not with monsters but with memories. Guts collapsed to his knees, screaming as visions tore through him. The eclipse, the Hawk's Casca's broken scream. The God hand didn't appear physically this time. They didn't need to. They let the past do the work. Clark rushed to him, gripping his shoulders. Guts, look at me. Guts, I was wild. They're here. Clark felt it then. Their assault wasn't aimed at him. It was using Guts as the point of impact. They were trying to force Clark into an impossible choice. Stop the visions, or stop the monsters that were already moving elsewhere. Clark closed his eyes. He made his choice. Instead of fighting the attack, Clark opened himself to it. He let the suffering wash over him. Every scream, every loss, every betrayal this world had inflicted, funneled through the brand and into his mind. It hit like a collapsing star. Clark cried out, dropping to one knee as agony beyond physical pain tore through him. But he did not turn away. He absorbed it. The ground shook. Light flared not violently, but steadily, like a sun refusing to be eclipsed. High above, the God hand stiffened. "This is unexpected," Ubik muttered. Clark stood slowly, eyes blazing not with rage, but with unbearable clarity. "You use suffering because you think it breaks people," Clark said, voice carrying across planes of existence. "But suffering also teaches. It shows what must never be allowed again." The attack stopped. Guts gasped, collapsing forward. Clark caught him before he hit the ground. For the first time since the eclipse, the brand dimmed. Just slightly. Guts stared up at Clark, stunned. "What did you do?" Clark looked toward the dark sky. "I stopped running from this world's pain that God hand withdrew for now. Not because they were defeated, but because, for the first time, they didn't know what would happen next. And uncertainty, in a world built on inevitability, was dangerous. The uncertainty spread like a crack in ice. Clark felt it in the hours that followed, not relief, not victory, but a subtle shift, as if the world itself was re-evaluating him. The pressure of causality didn't disappear, but it hesitated more often now, like a hand unsure whether to clothe into a fist. Guts recovered slowly. He sat by the fire, staring into the flames as if expecting them to speak. "They used to do that every night," he said quietly. "Rip me apart from the inside. Tonight, they stopped." Clark didn't smile. "They'll try again. Differently." Guts nodded. "They always do." They traveled toward the mountains, drawn by rumors carried on broken roads, of apostles gathering, of monsters moving, not randomly, but with intent. Clark could feel it too, a convergence. The God hand wasn't lashing out anymore. They were preparing. Along the way, they found survivors who didn't flee at Clark's presence. Some approached cautiously. Others simply watched him pass, eyes following the cape like it was something fragile and temporary. A woman with a burned arm asked him, "Will you stay?" Clark answered honestly, "As long as I'm needed." She didn't thank him. She just nodded, as if committing the words to memory before they could be taken away. That night, Clark stood alone on a ridge, staring up at the stars, faint, distant, struggling to shine through a sky that didn't want them. He thought of Earth, of Metropolis, of a world where saving people didn't feel like defiance against existence itself. "You doubt?" came a voice behind him. Clark turned. A man stood there who hadn't been there a moment before, thin, pale, smiling with too many teeth. "Ubik, you shouldn't be able to manifest here," Clark said calmly. Ubik shrugged. "You shouldn't be here at all. Look at us both breaking rules." Clark folded his arms. "What do you want?" Ubik leaned close, eyes glittering. "To understand you. You feel pain, but you don't surrender to it. You inspire struggle without despair. That's inefficient." Clark's jaw tightened. "You call suffering efficiency. In this world," Ubik chuckled, "it's currency." Clark stepped closer, his presence warping the air. "Then your economy is about to collapse." Ubik's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. "You really believe that, don't you?" "I do." Ubik vanished, laughter trailing behind him like a threat. Below, in the valleys, apostles began to fall not to Clark, but to each other. Betrayals, ambushes, fear spreading through the ranks of monsters who had never known fear. Causality was unraveling. Guts watched from afar as Clark descended back toward camp. "You're changing things," he said. "I don't know if that's good or bad." Clark met his gaze. "Neither did I. When I first chose to help people," Guts grunted. "This world punishes people who try." Clark placed a hand on the hilt of the Dragonslayer, a nod in challenge. "But respect. Then I'll take the punishment." High above, the God Hand convened once more. "He is no longer reacting," Conrad hissed. "He is teaching them to resist," Slun said softly. Voight spoke last, voice colder than the void between stars. "Then the next lesson must be absolute. Far away, deep within the abyss, something ancient began to awaken something, even the God Hand rarely invoked. Clark felt it like a distant eclipse forming, and he knew the endgame had begun. The endgame began with fire, not the fire of destruction, not the flames that could be quenched by water or steel, but fire that burned in the soul of the world itself. The mountains shook as if the earth remembered its own cruelty, and the sky fractured into unnatural patterns. Stars blinked and vanished as though the universe itself held its breath. Clark hovered above the chaos, cape snapping violently in winds that were not entirely natural. The brand flared on Guts' neck like a beacon, pulsing violently, drawing every cursed thing in the land toward them. Apostles emerged from every shadow, some familiar, some new horrors born from nightmares so deep they had names long forgotten. Guts' hand tightened around the Dragonslayer. "This is it," he said, voice low, raw. "The world itself is coming for us." Clark nodded. "Then we fight it together." The first wave hit like a tidal wave of steel and teeth. Klep moved through them, not killing recklessly, but dismantling their power, dispersing them like shadows in sunlight. Every blow he struck carried purpose, precision, and mercy where it could be afforded. Guts followed behind, a whirlwind of blood and defiance. For every monster Clark incapacitated, Guts destroyed another with bone-shattering fury. Together, they moved as one, a strange symmetry of hope and despair, light and shadow. And then, the sky itself broke open. A massive rift appeared, stretching across the horizon like a wound in reality. From it descended a figure that dwarfed everything they had seen, an apostle beyond comprehension, crafted from night and malice, its body a living nightmare. Its eyes burned with the accumulated cruelty of centuries, its limbs twisted in geometries no human mind could fully comprehend. Clark felt the weight of it immediately. He had fought gods, tyrants, monsters, and cosmic forces, but this was designed to undo him, to strip him of every instinct, every rule he relied upon. Guts roared and charged, Dragonslayer slamming against the creature, but it barely flinched. The brand screamed violently, pulling him with irresistible force. Clark lunged forward, meeting the monster's assault head-on, every muscle straining against impossible physics. The world fractured around them. Mountains cracked, rivers reversed, time stuttered. "You cannot win," a voice whispered, not from the monster, but from everywhere and nowhere. The God Hand. Not here, not now, not ever. Clark gritted his teeth, eyes glowing brighter than the sun. "Then I'll create a new way to win." He unleashed every ounce of control, every fraction of solar power, shaping it not into a weapon of destruction, but a force that purged the corruption from the air, from the land, from the minds of the innocent and cursed alike. Light spread like a tide, forcing the monster to recoil, forcing the apostles to flee, forcing the God Hand to acknowledge an anomaly in their design. Guts, panting and bloodied, stared at Clark with something close to disbelief. "You changed it," he said. "You actually changed it." Eclipse's jaw was tight. Sweat and soot coated his skin. "I didn't create the world," he said, "but I can bend it enough that maybe people like you can survive it." The rift in the sky began to close, the monstrous figure shrieking as it was pulled back into the void. The brand on Guts' neck dimmed, though it still pulsed, faintly a warning, not a command. Above them, the God Hand withdrew, not in defeat, but in curiosity. They had witnessed a force in Berserk's world that even they could not fully predict. Clark turned to Guts, voice steady despite exhaustion. "This world is broken, but it doesn't have to be. Completely lost." Guts lowered the Dragonslayer, finally allowing himself to breathe. "You're not like anyone else I've ever met," he said quietly. "Not like them, not like him." Clark smiled faintly, glancing at the horizon where the sun was barely rising over a scarred land. "I don't belong here," he said, "but while I'm here, I'll fight for the light." And for the first time in a world built on endless darkness, the dawn felt real. The God Hand would return. Griffith would return. Apostles would return. Apostles would return. But now, they faced someone who refused to break, someone who refused to surrender, someone who had brought hope into a world that had almost forgotten it. Because even in Berserk, even in the heart of despair, a single light could become a storm, and Superman was that storm. The fight was far from over, but the world had seen what defiance looked like. That God-hand could plan, apostles could hunt, darkness could rise. But the Man of Steel had entered, and for the first time in centuries, Berserk had someone who would not bend. The brand still pulsed faintly on Guts' neck, but now it whispered something different: survival, resistance, possibility, and that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. The light had arrived in a world of endless darkness, in a world forged from endless cruelty, where despair had become law and suffering the only constant. Superman's arrival was more than the intrusion of a stranger, it was the embodiment of resistance itself. He did not erase the darkness, nor could he. He could not undo centuries of pain, nor could he simply defeat the God-hand with raw power alone. What he did was something far rarer. He introduced hope into a world that had long forgotten it, and in doing so, he changed the rules of survival. Through his actions, Guts and the people of this cursed land glimpsed something they had never truly known: that even in a reality designed to crush spirit, courage and compassion could endure. Clark's presence forced the world to acknowledge that suffering is not the ultimate arbiter. That light, however fragile, can exist alongside darkness and even challenge it. The God-hand, the apostles, and the horrors of the brand were not defeated. They were confronted by an anomaly, a force they could not fully predict. Superman's intervention demonstrated that strength paired with morality can inspire change, that resistance matters, and that a single unyielding light can ignite defiance in even the most broken hearts. In the end, the story is not one of perfect victory or a fully healed world. It is a story of survival, of defiance, of resilience. Superman did not bring paradise to Berserk's universe, but he brought something arguably more powerful: the possibility of hope, a reminder that even in endless darkness, someone will stand and refuse to let evil define the fate of the world. Light had entered a world built for despair, and that alone had already begun to reshape everything. The darkness would remain, but it would no longer be absolute.